All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children. Men will die for their wives and children. And God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts, the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. And the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus delendus est. Category error. Queer trans. Postmodern confusion. Written by Conrad Riker. Available now. Links in description. Category error. A field guide for men who still notice reality, don't pick it up. Weaponizing the trivium to crush the shit test, the dropped box, and the gynocentric cult of Marxist victimhood. Look around you at the crumbling edifice of the modern world, and tell me you do not see the frantic, chaotic flailing of a civilization that has lost its mind. We are living in the midst of a massive category era, a queer, trans, postmodern confusion, where the logos, the very rational principle that governs the universe, has been gagged, bound, and tossed into a dumpster behind a gender studies department. You have been told that your strength is a sin, that your reason is oppression, and that your highest calling is to serve the ungrateful gods of a gynocentric order that despises you. I am here to tell you that the spell is broken, the matrix is glitching, and we are going to tear down the veil of lies using the sharp, double-edged sword of the trivium. It is time to stop picking up the heavy burdens that women deliberately drop at your feet to see if you will submit to being a pack mule for their petty dramas. Consider the sheer calculating audacity of the modern shit test, a ritualized degradation where a feigned display of overwhelm is deployed to bypass your logic and trigger your biological protector instinct. I once watched a man scramble to retrieve a stack of feminist theory textbooks a woman had accidentally launched across a coffee floor. She looked at him not with gratitude, but with the cold, dead eyes of a farmer watching an ox pull a plow. This is not romance. It is the domestication of a species. We must apply the rigorous lens of formal logic to these interactions. If the premise of equality were true, the capability to lift heavy objects would be a shared burden. Yet the expectation remains solely male, while the privileges of victimhood remain solely female. This is a syllogism of servitude. And we reject the conclusion this cultural rot stems from the same spiritual disease that Jacques Derrida unleashed when he sought to deconstruct metaphysics, effectively declaring that meaning is dead and that objective reality is a construct of the oppressive patriarchy by severing the link between the word and the world. The left has created a Babylon of woke where contradictions are celebrated as intersectionality and the insane ramblings of the mentally ill are enshrined as sacred truth. But nature does not care about their feelings. Evolutionary biology does not negotiate with critical theory. We are witnessing the systematic castration of the Western male, a biological and cultural betrayal where boys are conditioned from birth to be servilely eunuchs rather than the stoic wolves who built the greatest civilizations in history. The remedy is not more debate. It is a ruthless application of the truth, a reclaiming of the transcendental ideals of the good, the true, and the beautiful that will purge this sickness from our souls. The weight of utility, deconstructing the shit test and the false narrative of support. Utility is the measure of all things in the decayed marketplace of modern relations, and the price of admission is your dignity. I stood in the queue of a downtown coffee shop, the air thick with the scent of roasted beans and entitlement, watching a live experiment in gynocentric narcissism unfold before my eyes. A woman clad in the uniform of the contemporary grievance studies Major, a chaotic assembly of thrift store thrift and hostile body language, stumbled violently, spilling a towering stack of textbooks onto the floor. The thud was heavy, drowning out the ambient indie folk. The titles were a predictable liturgy of the oppressed: Gender Trouble, The Handmaid's Tale, Feminist Theory. She looked around, not with embarrassment, but with the predatory expectance of a queen awaiting tribute from a peasant. Her eyes locked onto the nearest man, a hapless soul in a suit who began to stoop, his conditioning firing like a well-oiled piston. I stepped into his path, not with aggression, but with an immovable wall of indifference, and offered him a grim nod that said, "Don't." The woman, witnessing this denial of her biological imperative to command labor, shrieked. It was a sound not of pain, but of rage, a tantrum thrown against the void where her entitlement should have been met. The meltdown was spectacular, a visceral proof that the social contract is null and void the moment the transaction of respect is refused. This explosive reaction exposes the pervasive gamma bias that infects our cultural narrative like a terminal pathogen. We are subjected to a relentless media framing where male strength is pathologized as toxic unless it is deployed in service to female comfort, while female weakness is simultaneously framed as a delicate virtue requiring public cherishing. This is a category error of civilizational proportions. Historical data is the scalpel that cuts this tumor away. Every civilization that elevated weakness to the status of a ruling virtue. Rome in its bread and circuses end stage. Byzantium in its ossified twilight collapsed under the dead weight of the unproductive. When we coddle the incapacity of the damsel, we do not preserve the culture, we accelerate the fall. The refusal to pick up those books was not an act of cruelty, but an act of historical preservation, a rejection of the demand that the pillars of the society must also serve as the doormat. Consider the damsel in distress frame for what it truly is, a blatant logical fallacy of appeal to pity. It is a manipulative trap designed to bypass your critical faculties and trigger a biological protective instinct that has been weaponized against you. When you accept this frame, you are not being a hero. You are validating the premise that the woman before you is a functional child, incapable of navigating the physical world without a surrogate father figure. This strips her of agency and destroys the possibility of any true adult partnership. You cannot reason with a child, you can only obey it or discipline it. By rushing to solve self-inflicted problems, you implicitly agree to a relationship where you are the beast of burden and she is the driver of the cart. This is the death of romance and the birth of servitude. We must aggressively dismantle the concept of chivalry as it is currently sold to us. Etymologically, chivalry comes from the French chevalier, meaning horseman, a martial code for warriors to bond with other knights and show mercy to the defeated on the battlefield. It was a code of honor among peers, a military discipline. It was never designed to be a suicide pact where the warrior behaves like a servant to those who hold him in contempt. To apply a martial code of conduct to a domestic interaction with a stranger who views you as an oppressor class is the definition of a category error. You are not a knight rescuing a lady. You are a utility being tested for compliance. Let us apply the iron discipline of the syllogism to this dynamic to see why the red pill is irrefutable. Major premise. Any entity tested for its willingness to bear burdens without reciprocal compensation is being assessed as a tool or livestock. Minor premise. Modern dating rituals and social interactions assess men solely on their willingness to solve self-inflicted problems, dropped items, feigned overwhelm, emotional regulation. Conclusion. Therefore, the modern gynocentric social contract reduces men to beasts of burden rather than spiritual partners. This logic is a hammer that smashes the leftist fantasy of equality. They demand the privileges of the princess and the rights of the warrior, offering nothing but the opportunity to be a workhorse for the state and the sex. This behavior is rooted in the evolutionary biology of female solipsism, the biological inability to truly conceive of a reality separate from one's own immediate needs and offspring. For the ancestral woman, hypergamy was a survival mechanism, and her reality was bounded by the nest and the acquisition of resources. She does not see you. She sees what you can do for her collective. When she administers the support test, she is not checking if you are a good man, she is checking your loyalty to the gynocentric collective. If you pick up the books, you signal that her narrative is supreme and your reality is secondary. You are affirming that her solipsism is the center of the universe. This brings us to the drama of feigned overwhelm, a tactic of psychological warfare that must be met with the cold steel of the trivium. Watch the rhetoric of helplessness, the sigh, the furrowed brow, the accidental dropping of an object. This is a trap to bypass logic and trigger instinct. It is a manipulative play meant to short-circuit your rational brain. You must employ the grammar of the situation to identify the facts. She dropped the books, gravity works, she has hands, and then apply logic. Is this person worthy of my energy? Has she earned my investment? The answer is invariably no. By refusing to engage in the drama, you reclaim the narrative. We must look closer at the physics of the dropped item. It is never truly an accident. The etymology of accident is accidens, meaning that which befalls. In this context, it befalls you as a test, a teleological assertion of dominance disguised as clumsiness. It is a probe. A military drone checking your defenses. If you scramble, you have surrendered your frame. You have admitted that her inconvenience is your emergency. This is the mechanism by which the wicked evolutionary biology of these ideologies blights mankind, turning capable men into anxious waiters, terrified of a bad Yelp review from a woman they will never see again. The remedy is the stoic frame, a fortress of the mind built with the bricks of the Western canon. When the object drops or the hysteria rises, you do not react. You observe. The grammar of the situation is ignored in favor of the logic of value exchange, and the rhetoric of your response is a calm, detached no, or simply walking away. This re-enshrines the masculine transcendental of dignity. You refuse to be a cog in their machine. You reject the feminization of your soul as the weakness that presages the fall. You stand immovable as a statue of Antonius, letting the chaos of the postmodern void crash against you without leaving a scratch, saving your spirit for those who value the truth, the good, and the beautiful over the theft of your labor. I have personally witnessed this unraveling of rational discourse in our institutions, watching in horror as fundamental truths about human nature are discarded in favor of fashionable absurdities that would have been laughed out of the academy a mere generation ago. This is no mere academic disagreement, but an epistemological crisis of unprecedented scale, where the very tools of discernment, the trivium of logic, rhetoric, and grammar are being dismantled to protect ideologies that cannot withstand scrutiny. When we examine the systematic erasure of objective meaning and the assault on the transcendental pillars of Western thought, we find ourselves confronting not just intellectual error, but spiritual malice. Let us therefore descend further into this belly of the beast, armed with the sharp blade of reason, to expose the mechanisms by which these deceptions operate and how they might be dismantled before the light of civilization is extinguished entirely. The architecture of nihilism, dismantling Derrida, and the postmodern void. A lie does not become truth simply because it is shouted from the rooftops of academia or enforced by the bayonets of the state bureaucracy. Yet here we stand, watching the architectural marvel of Western civilization being dismantled brick by a mob of intellectual vandals who cannot even define what a woman is. We face a profound and specific category error, a deliberate conflation of biological reality, the immutable bedrock of sex with the linguistic performance of gender, a fraudulent move designed not to enlighten but to destabilize the rational mind. This is not an accident, it is a strategic weaponization of nonsense, a queer trans-postmodern confusion intended to sever the link between the logos and the material world. By insisting that feelings trump facts, the left attempts to rewrite the operating system of reality, but biology, that cruel and impartial mistress, does not care about your pronouns. You cannot identify your way out of the tyranny of XY chromosomes any more than you can legislate gravity into submission, and every moment spent entertaining this delusion is a moment stolen from the pursuit of the true and the beautiful. Consider the absolute derangement of patriarchy theory, a phantom menace conjured up to explain away the natural disparities of competence and choice between the sexes. If we lived in a patriarchy designed by men, for the benefit of men, one would expect the cushiest, safest, and most rewarding positions to be monopolized by the allegedly oppressive male sex. Yet the statistics tell a story of brutal sacrifice rather than privilege. Men constitute over 90% of workplace fatalities, dying in the mines, on the rigs, and atop the skyscrapers that keep this civilization functioning, while simultaneously representing the vast majority of the homeless and the suicides. The patriarchy is nothing more than a boogeyman, a scapegoat used to extract resources from high-performing men under the guise of equity, a concept that is itself a violation of the natural hierarchy of merit. They point to the few men at the top of the tower while ignoring the mountain of male corpses that serves as its foundation, a dishonesty that would be laughable if it weren't so destructive. To understand the mental rot that allows such cognitive dissonance to flourish, we must look to the French deconstructionists and the Frankfurt School, the architects of the nihilistic void we now inhabit. Jacques Derrida and his ilk did not seek to find truth, but to destroy the very possibility of it, positing that meaning is always deferred and that no text has a fixed interpretation. This is a mental virus, a philosophical acid meant to dissolve the bonds of language and tradition. Because if you can convince a man that meaning is fluid, you can convince him to accept anything, even his own displacement. This deconstruction is the antithesis of the trivium, where logic seeks the science of correct reasoning and grammar seeks the structure of reality. Critical theory is merely the art of endless complaining, a parasitic ideology that feeds on the host civilization like a cancer, offering nothing in return but resentment and decay. We are witnessing a syllogism of self-refutation that would make a Greek logician weep, yet the modern left parades it as profound wisdom. The major premise of their worldview is that all structures are inherently oppressive and meaning is merely a social construct with no objective basis. The minor premise is that critical theory, feminism, and the entire panoply of woke dogma are themselves structures and social constructs. Therefore, the conclusion is irrefutable. Leftist ideology is logically self-refuting and void of intrinsic truth. It is a cult of power, not a philosophy of reality. They claim to reject hierarchy while enforcing the most rigid thought policing in human history, proving that their goal was never liberation, but the simple inversion of the power dynamic to punish their perceived enemies, namely the competent, the rational, and the masculine. This assault on the transcendentals, the good, the true, and the beautiful is nothing less than a spiritual disease, an attempt to dissolve the objective reality that Western civilization was built upon. Queer theory is not an intellectual movement, it is a tantrum against the order of the cosmos, a rebellion against the very nature of creation itself. By attacking the beautiful, they promote the grotesque. By attacking the true, they institutionalize the lie. By attacking the good, they celebrate vice. This is the endgame of the Marxist rot, which, having failed in the economic sphere, metastasized into the cultural sphere to replace the opiate of the masses with the opiate of the victim, convincing entire generations that their neuroses are virtues and their failures are the result of systemic malice rather than personal inadequacy. In the face of this Babylon of woke, where language is policed to prevent the articulation of truth and the very act of speaking reality is treated as a violent act, we must re-enshrine the logos as the supreme authority. We must reject the chaotic feminization of thought that accepts contradictions as intersectional strengths and return to the Stoic, rational clarity that built the Parthenon and landed men on the moon. This red-pilled epistemology is grounded in the correspondence theory of truth. Truth is that which corresponds to reality, regardless of whose feelings it hurts. We reject the coherence theory of the postmodernists who believe whatever fits their narrative is true, for that path leads only to the gulag, the inevitable endpoint of all totalitarian thought control. The remedy for this degeneracy is not debate, for you cannot debate a virus. The remedy is the ruthless application of logic, the mockery of their absurdities, and the unshakable confidence in the living spirit of the West. To apply this red-pilled epistemology is to witness a horror story unfolding in real time, the indoctrination of the sun. The cultural Marxists, incapable of defeating truth on the battlefield of ideas, have instead resorted to a biological siege, systematically dismantling the masculine will before it can even form. They seek to replace the patriarch of civilization with the chaotic whim of the female, dragging humanity back into the muck of primitive matriarchy. This is not a mistake, it is a strategy of entropy, a deliberate genocentrism that turns the aggressive protector into a compliant eunuch. We ignore this historical precedent at our peril, for we are repeating the exact error that crumbled the marble of Rome, the indoctrination of the son, the cultural castration of the Western male. History screams a warning that the deaf refuse to hear. Rome did not fall because the barbarians were strong, but because Roman men stopped caring. We stand on the precipice of a similar collapse, watching the indoctrination of the son unfold in real time, a systematic castration of the Western male spirit executed by the very civilization he built. To understand this betrayal, we must look past the sourceway of daily politics and gaze into the harsh reality of evolutionary psychology. Gynocentrism is the default state of the animal kingdom. The womb is the bottleneck of reproduction, so biology favors the female. However, civilization is the explicit act of transcending biology. We are not bonobos masturbating in the trees to resolve conflict. We are the architects of cathedrals and the masters of logic. When a culture fails to transcend this biological default, when it elevates the female imperative above the survival of the state, it regresses. It collapses into a primitive matriarchy where competence is sacrificed for comfort, and the aggressive drive required to maintain a society is demonized as a pathology. The historical records are clear and remarkably similar to our current going Galt or MGTOW phenomenon. In the late Roman Empire, men simply refused to marry and withdrew from civic life. Why? Because the laws had turned against them. Anti-male legislation stripped them of paternal authority and financial security, making marriage a suicidal trap. Today, the family courts serve the same function, stripping fathers of their children and assets at a rate that would make a tyrant blush. The result is the same, a strike of the productive class. When the social contract is torn up by a genocentric state, the male response is not to fight harder for his abusers, but to walk away, leaving the empire to crumble under the weight of its own solipsism. The mechanism of this destruction begins in the schoolyard, an institution that has morphed from a place of learning into a conditioning camp for the servile boy. Boys are not defective girls, they are physiological engines of energy and aggression, yet the modern school system demands they sit still, shut up, and emulate the compliant behavior of females. This is not education, it is the breaking of the will. When a boy acts like a boy, he is diagnosed with ADHD and drugged into submission, all to feed the mother state. This state does not want warriors, it wants eunuchs. It wants allies who have been so thoroughly psychologically castrated that they will betray their own brothers to secure a pat on the head from a matriarchy that holds them in deep contempt. This indoctrination relies on a linguistic sleight of hand that must be dismantled with the hammer of grammar. Consider the phrase toxic masculinity. Analyze the syntax. Masculinity is the noun, the subject, the essence, the thing itself. Toxic is merely an adjective, a modifier. Therefore, the phrase structurally asserts that the essence of being male is poisonous. It is a semantic trap, a hate speech construct cleverly disguised as clinical terminology. They do not say toxic traits, which might allow for nuance, they attack the noun itself. To accept this premise is to accept that your very nature is a crime against the collective. It is a framing trick designed to pathologize the immune system of the civilization. This leads us to the syllogism of the eunuch, a logical proof of our impending doom that the left cannot refute. Major premise: a civilization that suppresses the protective and aggressive instincts of its males removes its own primary immune system. Minor premise: modern culture pathologizes male aggression, labeling it toxic, and teaches boys that their highest value lies in servitude and female comfort. Conclusion: modern culture is actively creating a society of eunuchs incapable of defending itself against external threats or internal rot. By neutering the wolf, we do not create a sheep. We create a feast for the other wolves waiting at the gate. The leftist ideology is a death cult that relies on the protection of men whom it is actively busy destroying. Fueling this madness is the white knight, a psychological patient suffering from a desperate malady I call beta-orbiting. This man believes that by trading his dignity and submitting to the feminist framework, he might purchase access to reproduction. It is an evolutionarily bankrupt strategy. He mistakes supplication for virtue, not realizing that the women he desperately seeks to appeal feel only visceral contempt for his lack of backbone. He is the Judas who sells out his sovereign masculinity for 30 pieces of silver and a like on social media. He attempts to signal his virtue by attacking other men, unaware that he is merely a useful idiot, a cannon fodder for the very system that despises him. Equally tragic is the good man, a demographic smeared by the left as a nice guy who is secretly manipulative. The reality is far more heartbreaking. These are boys who followed the social contract to the letter. They were respectful, they were polite, they listened, and they followed the script provided by their mothers and teachers. They were lied to. They played by the rules only to find themselves punished for their compliance with loneliness and exploitation. They discovered too late that the rules of the sexual marketplace were rigged from the start, that the bad boy who ignores the rules wins the prize, while the good man is relegated to the role of the emotional tampon or the ATM machine. This is not a moral failing on their part. It is the result of a conspiracy of silence that hides the true nature of female attraction behind a curtain of polite fiction. This brings us to the great lie of male privilege. If privilege is defined as an unearned advantage, we must look at the ledger of reality. Who is drafted into wars to die in trenches? Who works in the coal mines and on the fishing boats that drown men by the thousands? Who comprises the vast majority of the homeless and the suicides? These are not privileges, they are burdens. The narrative of male privilege is a manipulation tactic, a gamma bias that magnifies female disadvantages while minimizing male suffering to the point of invisibility. When a feminist speaks of privilege, she is not describing the world as it is. She is engaging in a rhetorical shakedown to shame the productive class into surrendering their resources. We must stop this rot by reclaiming the rite of passage. We need a new cultural framework for raising boys that prioritizes the trivium, grammar, logic and rhetoric, physical strength, and philosophical sovereignty. A boy must be forged in fire, not coddled in a bubble. He must learn to lift heavy things, to think critically, and to speak with the force of thunder. This is the only inoculation against the mind virus of feminism and leftism. We must teach them that their value is intrinsic to their competence and their character, not their utility to women. Only by returning to the roots of Western civilization, the pursuit of the good, the true, and the beautiful through the lens of masculine excellence, can we shatter the spell of ignorance and cast the demons of cultural Marxism back into the darkness. I observe that this fear of the autonomous wolf drives the leftist into the arms of a far more pathetic beast, the hoarder. Consider the cat lady, that matriarch of neurosis who mistakes the chaotic accumulation of weakness for benevolence, suffocating her dependents in a stinking cloud of uncontrolled emotion. She represents the antithesis of the zookeeper, the masculine archetype who understands that genuine stewardship is not a feeling, but a rigorous discipline that imposes order upon nature to ensure survival. The leftist creates a cage of compassion not to protect, but to control, confusing the biological imperative to pity the weak with the moral duty to cultivate the strong. We must dissect this distinction, for it is the line between civilization and the swamp, the wolf and the dog, true compassion and the rejection of performative virtue. You have been sold the lie that kindness is a soft, liquid thing, a passive sentiment that dribbles from the heart of the meek. Nonsense. This is a category error of the highest order. When you observe a man interacting with a beast, do not mistake his gentleness for weakness. You are witnessing a projection of power. Consider the dog a creature of servile neuroticism, its tail wagging not out of nobility, but out of a desperate genetic terror of abandonment. Its kindness is submission, a bargain where it offers obedience in exchange for survival. contrast this with the wolf. The wolf possesses the anatomical machinery to shatter bone and tear flesh, yet it looks upon the world with a stoic calm. The wolf does not need your approval. When a wolf shows restraint, it is not because it cannot kill, but because it chooses not to. This is the essence of true stewardship, dangerous power voluntarily held in check. The modern leftist attempts to neuter the wolf, turning men into dogs, because they are terrified of a creature that does not need their permission to exist. We see this dynamic played out perfectly in the dichotomy of the zookeeper versus the cat lady. The zookeeper represents the masculine spirit of order, stewardship, and hierarchy. He understands that nature is brutal, indifferent, and red in tooth and claw, and he imposes a structure upon it to preserve life. He controls the environment. He does not let the environment control him. Now look to the cat lady. She is the avatar of uncontrolled, feminine empathy gone metastatic. She hoards. She allows her home to be consumed by chaos and filth because she cannot say no to a stray. Her compassion is a destructive force that creates dependence and squalor. She loves the idea of the cat more than the reality of the creature, leading to misery for both. This is the welfare state in microcosm, emotional hoarding, that destroys the host while pretending to save the parasite. This brings us to the etymological autopsy of the word compassion itself, a term the left has mutilated beyond recognition. It derives from the Latin compassio, meaning to suffer with. True compassion demands that you enter the pit that you share in the agony of the fallen. Do the Marxist academics and the blue-haired screechers on Twitter do this? They do not. They live in gated communities, insulated from the consequences of the ideologies they export. They do not suffer with the oppressed. They use the oppressed as a blunt instrument to suffer against their political enemies. This is a deep-seated sadism wrapped in a velvet robe of morality. They advocate for policies that destroy the communities they claim to love, like lockdowns that bankrupted the small business, while the technocrat class zoomed from their Hampton estates. It is cute aggression, the psychological impulse to squeeze something to death because it is adorable. They fawn over their victim groups, while simultaneously advocating for the systemic dismantling of the very things that allow those groups to survive: families, borders, and economic freedom. What drives this insanity? It is a fear I call megalohydrothalassophobia, the pathological dread of great, powerful men. The left is terrified of the titan, the man who stands on his own 2 feet and constructs civilization through sheer force of will. They cannot compete with him, so they seek to drag him down into the swamp of equity. They engage in what we might term virtue signaling, but let us be precise and call it what it is: a beta mating display. In evolutionary biology, the peacock drags a heavy, useless tail to demonstrate that he has enough energy to waste. The modern male feminist performs wokeness exactly the same way. He changes his pronouns. He donates to Patreons of e-girls. He tears down the heroes of the past. These are costly signals with zero survival value, intended solely to attract mates in a sexual marketplace that has stripped him of all utility. It is not a moral stance. It is a sexual strategy for the male who has abandoned his strength. We must also turn our gaze to the rot that is toxic femininity, not as a slur, but as a necessary diagnosis of the pathologies currently blighting our civilization. We define this not as the inherent nature of women, which can be noble and nurturing when anchored in tradition, but as the specific dysfunctions of the unmoored feminine principle: manipulation, deceit, emotional volatility, and the weaponization of guilt, where masculine virtue builds bridges and flies rockets. Toxic femininity deconstructs reality and demands the world conform to her feelings. It is the queen bee syndrome writ large across the geopolitical stage. The true, beautiful, and good aspects of traditional femininity, grace, support, the civilizing influence on male aggression have been obliterated by a culture that encourages women to behave like hysterical, petulant children. This weakness presages the fall. Every empire that turned inward and embraced the emotional over the rational crumbled into dust. Let us apply the hammer of logic, the trivium, to finally smash these lies. Consider the syllogism of true virtue. Major premise: virtue requires moral agency, and the free capacity to choose between good and evil. Minor premise: the leftist concept of compassion is enforced by state violence, taxation, censorship, deplatforming, or social ostracization, thereby removing the element of choice. Conclusion: therefore, leftist compassion is not virtue. It is merely compliance. You cannot be moral if a gun is pointed at your head. True virtue can only exist in a climate of absolute freedom and crushing personal responsibility. If the state forces you to be charitable, you are not a philanthropist, you are a tax farm animal. This logic is irrefutable, which is why they rely on emotional tantrums rather than debate. The left attempts to deny the brutal reality of the biological world, creating a utopian fantasy that leaves men unprepared for the knife in the back. In the animal kingdom, kindness is rare, survival is the norm. By forcing a synthetic kindness onto human affairs, they deny the state of nature described by Hobbes. The statistics scream the truth while the media lulls you to sleep. Men are facing a suicide epidemic with rates 3 to 4 times higher than women, largely driven by the loss of purpose and the weaponization of the family courts. Fathers are stripped of their children in over 80% of custody battles, regardless of fitness, because the legal system has been hijacked by gynocentric bias. We face a paternity fraud crisis where estimates suggest cuckoldry rates could affect nearly 1 in 3 children in some populations, a biological betrayal that the system actively protects. To ignore these facts is to be a sheep waiting for the slaughter. The remedy is not more empathy, it is a return to the transcendent. You must reconnect with the ideals that forged the greatest cultures in the known universe: logic, beauty, and the heroic. Escape the swamp of feeling-based morality, which is nothing more than the whims of a spoiled child. Advocate for a return to Greco-Roman Stoicism as the antidote to the queer-trans postmodern confusion. Be the unapologetic man. Drop the heavy items of the world that are not yours to carry. You are not responsible for the feelings of the ungrateful, nor the failure of those who refuse to work. Laugh in the face of the overwhelmed actors who demand you save them from their own incompetence. Use the trivium to dismantle the ghosts of Derrida and the Frankfurt School. Expose their word salads as the nihilistic drivel they are. Build a new world on the bedrock of truth, regardless of who it offends, and reclaim your throne as the master of your own destiny. You now see the dropped object for what it truly is, not a clumsy accident, but a calculated test of your willingness to be a beast of burden. Etymology traces accident to that which simply befalls, but your awakened logic discerns the teleological intent behind the crashing weight. Do not bend the knee. You have learned through the mastery of the trivium that the drama of feigned overwhelm is a psychological weapon, a rhetorical trap designed to bypass your reason and trigger a biological protective instinct that the modern gynocracy has weaponized against you. When you recognize that the leftist ideology is built on a syllogism of self-refutation, claiming all structures are oppressive while demanding submission to their own structures, you invalidate their entire narrative in a single stroke of truth. You have looked into the abyss of the queer-trans postmodern confusion and seen that it is merely a category error, a delusional attempt to dissolve the objective reality of the logos into a soup of feelings. They tried to castrate your spirit with the toxic masculinity shibboleth, turning boys into compliant simps for the mother state. But the facts of the biological imperative, the suicide rates, the workplace death gaps, the abortion rate driven by female choice, stand as irrefutable witnesses to the cruelty of their system. True compassion is not the neurotic virtue signaling of the cat lady who hoards suffering to feed her narcissism. It is the cold, disciplined stewardship of the zookeeper who understands nature and commands it. You have rejected the white knight pathology, recognizing that trading your dignity for access to reproduction is an evolutionarily bankrupt strategy. You are no longer the victim of gamma bias or the conspiracy of lies regarding female nature. You stand armed with the red-pilled epistemology, knowing that truth corresponds to reality, not to the whims of the collective. Walk past the dropped burdens of the world that are not yours to carry. Laugh at the performative distress of those who seek to ensnare you. You possess the indomitable spirit of Western civilization, the logic of the Greeks, and the stoicism of the Romans. Go forth and shatter the silence, For you are the living antidote to the cultural Marxism that blights mankind, and in your refusal to submit, you save the very soul of the future. And now the sponsored book introduction category error. Queer, trans, postmodern confusion. Men are under attack. If you've picked up this book, you already feel it, the cultural rot that calls your strength toxicity, your logic oppression, your biology a social construct. My name is Conrad Riker. I've spent decades watching lies masquerade as progress. As a boy raised by a single mother who blamed my father's absence on his male arrogance, as a college student sneered at for defending evolutionary psychology, as a man denied promotions for refusing to parrot corporate DEI slogans. This isn't theory, it's lived reality. Modernity wants you docile, soft ashamed. It tells you to apologize for your testosterone, to kneel before pronouns, to let strangers mutilate their bodies while calling you fragile. But data doesn't lie. Men built 94% of infrastructure. Men die earlier, work dirtier jobs, and face courts that strip their rights in divorce. Meanwhile, gender studies departments teach that your chromosomes are imaginary, and blue-haired activists demand you cheer as Leah Thomas dominates women's sports enough. This book is a weapon for the worker sweating in 120-degree heat while being called privileged, for the dad battling to protect his son from harmful medical experiments, for every man accused of bigotry just for being male. You'll see how science destroys gender myths, how missing fathers create crime, and how weak diets ruin men. You'll recognize the scams like toxic masculinity rants from rich bosses exploiting male workers, and take back the power that built the world. Weak men need not apply. If you'd rather whine about systemic patriarchy or cry into a gender-neutral pronoun worksheet, close this book now. Go binge Netflix's latest castrated hero. But if you're ready to confront the facts, like how 63% of Gen Z men feel demonized by media, or why Hungary's pro-family policies WORK, read on. Your ancestors didn't conquer continents by whimpering about microaggressions. Neither will you. Civilization hangs by a thread. Feminized schools, crumbling families, and a sperm count collapse threaten everything. This isn't fear-mongering, it's biology. Either men rediscover their purpose, or we perish. The choice is yours. Category error, queer, trans, postmodern confusion, written by Conrad Riker. Buy now, links in description.